It's the ERP Confab. I'm David Essex, industry editor at TechTarget's SAP website, with my colleague news writer Jim O'Donnell, just returned from our trip to the annual SAP Sapphire user conference in Orlando. As expected, SAP talked about generative AI almost nonstop, with numerous announcements and demos of new AI applications across the SAP product line. Major partnerships with heavyweights including Nvidia, Microsoft, and Google also made news, as did the surprise announcement that SAP is buying WalkMe, a digital adoption platform, for $1.5 billion. In the podcast, we give our take on the news and where all these developments put SAP against its ERP competitors in the race to make AI the shiny new engine of digital transformation. Well, Jim, you and I just returned a couple of nights ago from the SAP Sapphire conference in Orlando. And, there was I would say this time, a lot of news. And just to give the listeners a quick summary before you get into the details, lots of business AI announcements, and also especially the Joule Copilot,
Right.
generative AI Copilot. A somewhat surprise acquisition, surprise to many at the
Yep.
show. A lot of partner news and then a few changes to the Rise with SAP program. So if you wouldn't mind, if you could drill down a little bit into some of the specifics of what happened in those areas, that'd be great.
That's right. So I think, sort of the first day is always kind of the newsy stuff, although in this case, the acquisition was on the second day. So the first day was kind of all about sort of the partners that are being used to drive, I guess, what they're calling business AI, sort of their term for, business AI that's focused on business results and sort of industry specific functionality. So they had announcements with Nvidia, Google, AWS, Microsoft. I think probably the Microsoft announcement was the one that maybe is of most sort of interest or maybe used for customers and users right now. They're integrating Microsoft's Gen AI Assistant Copilot with the Joule. A lot of the announcements were sort of things that are put them in the category of shapes of things to come. There wasn't a lot of detail about when any of these capabilities, when of these partnerships are actually going to sort of bear fruit that people can really use. But just for an example of what they said, an example of a capability that will be possible, and I'm not even sure if this is available yet, but as far as the Microsoft Copilot and Joule integration, they had a little demonstration that if you are a Concur user, Joule is integrated in Concur in some cases for some tasks. That if you were to make say a plane or hotel reservation for a business trip in Concur, that would automatically trigger an update in your Outlook calendar. So a lot of this is sort of just in making tasks sort of more integrated across like applications. So that's what a lot of that is all about with the partnerships. As far as the SAP side of Joule, it's really the center part of their business AI strategy, kind of from the user point of view. Joule they've announced that it's going to be embedded across SAP's product portfolio. They've talked about that before, but I think they've put a little more meat on the bones of not exactly when a lot of this functionality will be available, but will be embedded in SAP S/4HANA Public Cloud, S/4HANA Private Cloud, developer applications like SAP Build, which is a low-code environment. And a lot of their supply chain and logistics applications will have, Joule sort of act as kind of an assistant for users in those applications for things like all kinds of tasks like helping users perform sort of routine tasks more effectively. Developers might use it to generate code. They showed some examples where you can just ask Joule to generate a code snippet and you can put that right in your application. And things like supply chain analytics use cases where you might ask Joule to provide some information about supply chain activities that you can take if there's potential disruptions, or you want to route your logistics more effectively, or keep your inventory levels sort of optimized. Those are the types of capabilities that are at least projected will be available in Joule. And they talked a lot about things like that.
One thing that I felt about the announcements of the generative AI applications, let's call them, and the Joule Copilot related AI applications
Right.
is it did seem like an impressive number of different capabilities in a lot of their platforms. Like you mentioned, supply chain, they're also doing it in the sustainability and then the procurement, which we
Right.
looked at in some detail. It reminds me of several years ago when Oracle used to take that approach to their AI, and they were better at not emphasizing the platform and giving it a fancy name like Infor does, and you could sort of say I think SAP kind of did if Leonardo was part of that. And then like they were very practical, like it does this thing, like you say, it finds relationships and it crosses applications to handle documents and invoices and that kind of thing.
Right.
And I feel like SAP did a better job. They've been gradually building these up, but this was a pretty impressive list of a bunch of like, I don't want to say little, but
Yeah.
very specific
Yeah.
uses of AI that you can see how it would appeal probably to people who really need those tasks to be done and automated.
I think that's absolutely correct. I think that they're sort of talking about it a lot, but there's not that, as I said, not a lot is being rolled out specifically, but they are kind of, I think, targeting, like maybe one thing in one application that they'll find some use. And then I think at one point Christian Klein said that there was 50 embedded use cases that they have now, and they want to double that number before the end of the year. So they're building up all this functionality all the time, and I think they're just going to keep rolling it out. And this kind of gets back to the heart of why they are so keen on getting everyone to the clouds, to cloud versions through Rise with SAP, because all these innovations are only going to be available to cloud customers. And one of their arguments for having the SaaS version, or I think to a certain extent the private cloud, they'll be available too, but mainly for their public cloud version, is that they are going to be able to roll out these new applications, these new capabilities, sort of on a continual basis. That you will have sort of continual access to whatever data is coming through. And if you are still on an on-premises version, that's sort of not possible. A lot of people wouldn't even update their system, certainly not even annually, but maybe every few years. So I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of the conversation around getting to sort of the business AI as a concept revolves around first getting to the cloud.
Yeah. Maybe one reason that they were able to do so many that are supposedly mostly coming in the second half of the year, which really only starts about 4 weeks from now. Mm-hmm. Maybe they mean the later half of the second half, is that a lot of the specific capabilities are what I would call more the search and summary type capabilities that we've all become mm-hmm. familiar with the various Gen AI tools, including the ones that are showing up like in the Microsoft search engine and Google, where it's not so much this amazing thing that machine learning is figuring out for you and it's coming up with a number at the end, but it's something that helps you. It does a lot of the stuff that a person might have done, looking for a lot of information, pulling it together, and mm-hmm. summarizing it, maybe trying to find things, patterns. So maybe it finds patterns, and so in some ways it's less impressive, And I'm no techie here, so I might be giving it short shrift, but that it just occurred to me, maybe that's why SAP was able to announce so many of these things, because on a technical level, it's a lot of the same kind of thing. Apply the Copilot, the Gen AI, to this database, to this data set, to that set of documents that have OCR done on them, and then go over to this one and this other application and find documents in supplier relationship management. And I don't know, I'm speculating here, and maybe that's just going to be the reality for this first big batch from all the vendors, that a lot of it is kind of glorified search and assistance with summarizing information.
Yeah, and it's just, I totally agree. I think that's probably sort of a way in for a lot of this stuff anyway. And one thing, you sort of, along the lines of business AI is they're not talking about like building sort of these large language models that will inform sort of the Gen AI. They're talking about sort of these very industry-specific kind of small language models, very focused language models that will, deliver sort of, it'll just act on the data that's specific to whatever task or industry or company data that might be in that.
Yeah, good point. They did, and they told us that. You and I were in a lot of the same briefings, and I think that was mentioned at least a couple of times by SAP people.
Yeah.
They always talk about the quality of the data, and you can't do this well. You can't trust the AI if you
Right.
haven't got your data figured out. And a lot of that probably falls on the customer and maybe the system integrator and the
Right.
people helping them.
Yep.
But maybe SAP, maybe there's a certain, they talk about industry standard best practices. Maybe they have gotten good, especially in the multi-tenant SaaS version of S/4HANA, at standardizing like the schema, the database schema and metadata enough that it's going to be more accurate and it's going to understand HR more, quote unquote, understand HR as opposed to procurement versus supply chain versus, financial reporting. And like you say, the narrower focus makes it more capable.
Yes, I think that's probably another reason why they want the users on the cloud. They say that they have very high ethical standards for their AI, that they won't use their customers' data inappropriately, let's put it that way. But they want their customers to sort of opt in to have their data, I think, be used in those ways that you mentioned, to kind of build up those standard, processes. That they'll argue, well, it helps the businesses run their processes more efficiently if they're standardized. Mm-hmm. The next sort of really kind of interesting announcements they had was they want everyone to move to Rise with SAP. They want everyone to move to the cloud, and obviously we know that's been an enormous challenge for them. With their large on-premises customer base, they were always evolving Rise with SAP, the program that is essentially for large enterprises to move to S/4HANA cloud. They also have Grow with SAP, which is essentially more for smaller enterprises, and it's really for greenfield implementations of S/4HANA public cloud, whereas Rise with SAP is a little more complex and it's much more for larger enterprises. So the tweak that they announced that got a lot of attention at Sapphire this year was Christian Klein mentioned this I believe it was the first opening keynote, was that every Rise customer was going to get an enterprise architect who would sort of be their guide. He called it your next business best buddy. I think that was the terminology he used. We had questions in several of the interviews that we had about what exactly that would mean, but I think is essentially that they're having someone that's on the SAP side that can work with their systems integrators or sort of presumably on their own to kind of guide customers through an SAP Rise engagement.
That seemed to be what they were saying, and our take was that, and they more or less confirmed it. I looked back at our conversation. We were able to sit down with Julia White, the Chief Marketing Officer. We were both a bit surprised by her bluntness about this, which I found kind of refreshing also. And this is a paraphrase. Some of these are direct quotes, but this is a very, very close paraphrase. She essentially said that they were adding the SAP Enterprise Architect to every Rise project or customer situation, including existing ones. I think they said during the first keynote, not just future ones, because they saw a tendency to do a lift and shift without change management. So just moving like the existing on-premises, and that that would presumably then be private cloud. And we were seeing a lot of that too. We were hearing that anecdotally, that a lot of this real so-called S/4HANA cloud implementations were really like taking on-premises S/4HANA and hosting it on like essentially a private cloud. She said, now this is a direct quote, it's a change for our implementation partners. They make a lot of money customizing the core. And that she saw this as appropriate pressure to put on them. And she says, we've been saying this for 3 to 5 years, and by this she meant the Rise with SAP methodology that should be followed, that involves the best practices in helping customers move to the multi-tenant SaaS version. She said if they're not in line with the Rise approach, they're not really partners. And she also said that she saw the top level partners, and by that she seemed to mean Deloitte, EY, PwC, some of those really big names. Yep. But the ones that deal, I think she said machinery, or the ones that deal with the coding, they don't get it as well.
In a sense, I guess maybe it shouldn't be that surprising. I think there's always a dance between an enterprise vendor like SAP and their partners, their systems integrators, about how they do that kind of stuff, how they kind of do the work that they do. And I think that SAP has probably always sort of recognized that the systems integrators, as you said, the Deloittes and EYs and PwCs, have built up really a lot of business, made a lot of money from doing customizations, from doing the kind of stuff that's making it harder for the companies that they do business with to do what SAP wants to do now, which is to move to the cloud, to the clean core. They're talking about the clean core, but the clean core is all about not having any of that customization. I'm sure there's been, who knows what kind of conversations they've had, behind closed doors with their big partners, but I'd be willing to bet that there've been a lot about, having them, change. They have to get on board and kind of start changing the way they do business. And, I think when we had a conversation also with Jürgen Miller, who's the chief product officer, and he did say that, he said Deloitte he mentioned as one that was really sort of reinventing their practice. I think it's, in a sense, maybe it was a little surprising that they were that candid about it.
Yeah.
But I don't think you could be really surprised about, what they're actually sort of want their partners to do. I think they want them to kind of get the customers to S/4HANA, and maybe that's one of the reasons why they have these enterprise architects that can kind of work with the SIs to, as you say, to help them understand what the methodology is and go do it the right way, not just do a lift and shift, not just keep those customizations sort of going and maintaining the customizations.
This notion of the clean core, which SAP didn't invent per se, as we were told, and has been around for a few years, I guess, for SAP customers still seems to be a relatively new thing. And my perception as a media person is that it's another piece of jargon that SAP has only started to use the last few months, or maybe last year or so at most. RISE has been around a few years now. S/4HANA has been around more years than that. What do you think it is? How did you take the meaning, these attempts at getting a definition out of SAP? What do you think?
To me, I thought they explained it fairly in fairly understandable terms. I don't think it's that difficult. It might be a difficult process to go through, but I don't think the concept itself. And I think that's really where when you're talking to customers that may be in the weeds of it, that maybe it's not that they don't understand the concept itself, but they don't understand or don't really know how they're going to get to what they want to go. I think it was our conversation with Jürgen Miller again. He said that SAP essentially wants companies to be able to be continually adoption sort of ready. So when you get to the point where you're on the cloud version, the public cloud version, ideally the SaaS version, and they're pumping out these new you're based on a standard process. If you want to extend that, if you do have a business that has some differentiating process that you kind of need, they are essentially saying you can do that in Business Technology Platform (BTP) that will have these APIs and extensions that say you can build on the core, the clean core, which is not customized, but you can build those quote-unquote customizations. You can still have them, but it would be through the apparatus of constructing it in Business Technology Platform, in BTP, and having it, sort of not be central to the system itself, but it would be an, extension, as essentially acting as a customization would now. He said, I think his quote was, even if you have a customized system for your business or industry, you do it in a way that is always upgrade ready. So when they come out with a new process, a new upgrade, a new capability, you're not going to have to go and change the customization, which is a lot of reasons why there's problems now when companies want to implement something new. Is they've got all these customizations that they have to either change or they have to go test them. But if you're on the and it's a much more complicated process. But if you have that clean core that they're talking about, you are going to be able to take the new capabilities that they're coming out with, sort of rolling through, and you don't have to worry about that. It's easier said than done.
Along the lines of what you said about the new capabilities, I'm pretty sure it was Irfan Khan who I met with. He's the President and Chief Product Officer of SAP HANA Database and Analytics. He was the one who pointed out, and this helped the clean core thing click for me, that they still listen, like all the vendors. They do get feedback from customers about what should be put in the multi-tenant SaaS version of S4HANA. It's not like it was set in stone 5 years ago, and there's never going to be any things added to it, some of which might be capabilities that, are the kinds of things that they would try to customize in. SAP has heard it from enough people, and then 6 months later, a year later, it gets put in. If I understand it correctly, that's still going to be the clean core, the central ERP that's provided by SAP. On the other hand, yes, they talk about business technology platform, and we heard more about business technology platform, I think, than ever before. At one show, except for maybe TechEd, which you used to go to. And they talk a lot about the application programming interfaces or APIs as being the way to go, yet that's not exactly a no-brainer, or it's not nothing to use APIs to extend an ERP system. There's still some complexity there, even though the tools, the development tools and the APIs themselves, I think, have gotten a lot better in recent years. Yes, they offer that as the approach and solution, and it probably is going to be okay enough, but it's not like it's secret sauce or, magic wand. There's people need to program, people need to work with APIs, take an API and then work with that as an integration. It's not a total drag and drop kind of, okay, these things two things are connected now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely correct. But it is interesting. I did, kind of in walking around in the floor, which I didn't have as much time as I wanted to do. I'm sure you were the same thing. But I did speak with one customer who was from Cardinal Health, who I think they're kind of a long-time customer. And he said that they're currently running ECC now. They're going through RISE transformation. They are going to S4HANA Public Edition. He said it's a fairly complex IT environment. They have multiple sites, and but they do want to get everything under one cloud. So they do understand sort of what the value of having a public cloud-based system is in a lot of ways. But he did say, I asked him about the clean core and whether he, that kind of question we were all sort of wondering about is whether customers do understand. And he said, yeah, he understood what the clean core was, but he said getting to that clean core was going to be very difficult. He said they have a lot of customized processes in their system. So, and he said, I think he said, I would bet there's no one customer that's actually ever going to really be true clean core. Mm-hmm. It's just like he's like every time, anytime you want to have any kind of sort of process that you want for your business, that's going to involve some sort of customization. So you're never actually going to get to a clean core. But this gets down to, I think, what a word that we kept sort of coming up against in the couple days we were there was sort of aspirational, mm-hmm. right? Yeah. That I think a lot of what SAP talks about is aspirational. They want to have sort of the business AI, all these coming new capabilities. And I think getting to the clean core it's a goal that they want to talk about. They want to get their customers sort of on the road. Realistically, is everyone going to be there? Probably no. Probably most of them aren't going to have a clean core eventually. But I think if enough of them get to S4HANA running public cloud, then SAP will be very happy about that.
Yeah. I'll just make a quick point about Organic Valley, very big dairy cooperative, sells primarily dairy products. I think all over the country. I buy some of them myself here in New England.
Sure.
And now that S4HANA move was to private cloud, and the CIO who I talked to, he said the decision to go that route was made a little bit before he got there a couple of years ago, but that was still kind of his preference because having been an on-premises person himself, he still wants more things to be on-premises, still not quite comfortable moving everything off into certainly a public cloud. We're still hearing those stories.
Yeah, and a lot of that just speaks to sort of the just wide range. I mean, that's sort of, I guess, the SAP's advantage, but it's also its challenge is that its customer base is so diverse, so many industries, so many different ways of they've had their systems configured and set up, and the way they've been running, it's extremely diverse. Some of them are very complex, some of them are not that complex, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting because one of the customer that they set me up with was also an agricultural co-op. It was Blue Diamond Growers, who are the almond people, the almond snacks and almond bries, almond milks and things like that. And they also, I talked to their CIO, they've gone from ECC to S4HANA private cloud. He didn't really say that there was, any particular. I think they just wanted to do a lift and shift to a managed environment, which currently I think they still have it being managed by a company called Managed Core, Managed Service Provider, and they're going with Rise with SAP to get away from the Managed Service Provider to have SAP run the environment. Just I think because it'll be a lot easier, and he said they provided incentives for them to do that. So that's one of the things with Rise with SAP. Some of the evolving sort of nature of Rise with SAP is in the past. I think earlier in the year they announced a whole bunch of incentives for customers to kind of to move them along. But again, there's a huge difference, and he had said that they weren't, was talking about the aspirational things. They are interested in things like AI, so I think they do want to take advantage of things like that. But they're not there yet. But he did say that they saw one of the demonstrations that happened on stage at one point when I believe it was probably in Christian Klein's keynote, where they showed some supply chain functionality that Joule was being used for, and he was kind of wowed by that. He thought it was really, because they're, as an agricultural sort of based company, consumer brands, but they also deal with, they have a co-op. They have like 3,000 co-op farmers who are dealing with environmental issues and logistics with, and he said if there's ways that they can sort of, get more analysis into, issues like that, and sort of, be able to have an easier way to figure out, what are the best ways to route their products, or what are some of the weather issues that they can start bringing in sort of outside information into their SAP. They use SAP Analytics Cloud to kind of get more sort of predictive analysis on what might be sort of environmental issues. That's one of those things where it's aspirational, but when a conference like this, somebody can see something like that, it really it can make a difference as far as what they actually want to get out of it.
Last major topic, we can't forget to talk about that not so little acquisition that SAP surprised everyone with on the second day.
They announced that they acquired a company called WalkMe, which WalkMe is a digital adoption platform, a DAP, which is essentially, it's a kind of a lot of people call it an emerging software market. So there's a few companies like this that basically it's software this is WalkMe, but I think there are other companies that do similar things. The WalkMe platform basically sits on top of a company's entire application landscape, let's say. So it could be SAP applications, it could include Salesforce, if they have Workday, so it'll sit on top of that, and it will guide users. It's a little more than like a training thing, but basically the way I understand it is if you're working in an application and you get stuck somewhere, process isn't working for you, WalkMe will come through and sort of guide you through that steps. And there's also going to be, so I think that's what it works now. They've also announced that they have sort of an AI thing that they're adding to it, where it'll give you sort of suggested things that you can do based on what other people in the system have done. So there's sort of that kind of AI part of it being brought into. And also, I did speak with Reuven Marata, who's he's kind of in charge of a portfolio within SAP, which is around their business transformation. And it also involves SAP Signavio, which they acquired a few years ago, which is a process, sort of a process, understanding processes better. And Lean IX, which is kind of an application that helps companies understand their IT architecture. So this looks like they're positioning WalkMe to be like the third leg of a three-legged stool, and maybe they'll add more legs and have a four-legged stool at some point. But anyway, So they'll have Signavio for understanding processes. They'll have LeanIX for a company to understand their architecture before and as they're going through their business digital transformation to the cloud. And WalkMe is kind of really essentially a change management tool that companies can use to make sure, first of all, that they're bringing in the capabilities that are going to be used, going to be adopted, and also sort of making sure that once the implementation happens, that the applications get adopted, basically, that they get used. Yeah. There's a user capability, but Murata also said that there's a sort of a way that the CIOs can understand sort of how applications are being used in the adoption, and he said that there's for the CIO, they have to understand what's actually being adopted because they're paying a lot of money for applications and sort of how they're being used. So if they're not being used correctly or if they're not being used at all, sort of why put money into it? So this WalkMe platform does have uses for the user base and also for the higher level CIA. As I said, it's going to fit in with this portfolio of products that are really intended to help their customers sort of plan for and manage and complete an S4HANA cloud adoption. It's an interesting application. It was $1.5 billion, which, I saw one report called that eye-popping. I don't know if it's eye-popping. They've got a lot of money, so, they paid $8 billion for Qualtrics a few years ago, so what's 1.5 billion?
Right? Yeah. Pretty soon it adds up to real money. I think that quote contributed to
exactly.
the late Senator
there are questions about this because WalkMe has, I think they said that 80% of WalkMe's business is actually non-SAP applications. As I said, it supports Salesforce, it supports Oracle, it supports Workday. And it was explained to me that, first of all, SAP says that WalkMe will continue to support all these applications. And they said there's sort of similar to, Signavio had other non-SAP applications that it had when it was first acquired. I'm not sure about LeanIX. I think they were very sort of SAP focused. I'm not sure if they had other applications. SAP says they will continue to support all these customers, and there was a question, I think, around whether the data that SAP now quote unquote owns from WalkMe, whether somebody like Salesforce or Oracle or Workday, are they going to be kind of comfortable having SAP having that data in their hands? And Murata explained to me that there shouldn't be concerns about that, whether there will be or not, whether they're justified or not, who knows. But he said that the WalkMe data sort of just works on the sort of the UI level that doesn't actually get into the kind of content of what those systems might have in them. So it's just working sort of on the process level of what's actually happening with the process. There's no data that's being exchanged on the transactional level. It is interesting. He said that there's possibility that SAP can use, because SAP, they have the access to SAP data with WalkMe, and he thinks that from a product development standpoint that SAP could benefit from this because they can sort of marry that content data with the process data and come up with more effective ways to develop applications for their users. But apparently that's not going to be an issue with with other companies that WalkMe supports right now. It's all early stages. The deal is it still has to go through regulatory approval. So they said they're targeting a closing date of the end of Q3. It is an interesting thing, and the other thing that was interesting is that WalkMe, I guess, is kind of helping to make a user's sort of use of the application easier and less frictionless, they call it. But they're also, at the same time, they're introducing kind of Joule as a UI. And from what I understood, I think you probably took away too from the first keynotes, was that Joule was essentially going to be the UI for a lot of SAP applications. You're just going to use this kind of Gen AI application to simplify the the use of your application. So how valuable is a WalkMe going to be if your UI is much simplified anyway through Gen AI?
Every year we like to take a step back and try to figure out where does this leave SAP after another year in the big trends. And the first one, I think, worth talking about, we have to talk about S/4HANA migration, because that's been, other than general moves to the cloud, there's fewer bigger things going on for SAP. I'm going to leave AI aside for the moment, as S/4HANA. And it occurred to me that I had the sense of SAP throwing everything but the kitchen sink at that problem, because it seems like they do make changes to RISE periodically, but they made these fairly big change of saying we're going to assign an enterprise architect to every RISE project, I'll call it. But they also added a couple of certification-like processes that are another way of ensuring and, I guess, reassuring the customer that an implementation partner is following the RISE methodology. And we heard the phrase, the right way, I think at least 2 or 3 times from the stage and in some of our discussions with SAP people. Doing things the right way, which can be a little bit of a scary term, but I think we know what they're getting at, what they mean. Like, they do have a vision for how they would like to see things to go and how they think their new technology could best be used by the customers. Just like even having Joule have some consulting capabilities, supposedly. Although I noticed that at least one of those capabilities was, again, very search-oriented. It was talking about searching certain documents, I think, and methodologies and support documents that consultant would use.
I kind of agree with your take on that. S/4HANA is definitely still going to be sort of their key application. I think at one point, Jürgen Muller said, at the heart, they're still an applications company, right? I think we mentioned, we'd heard a lot about BTP, and I asked whether BTP was going to sort of be a central, part of, are people going to start thinking of SAP as a BTP company? But he's like, no, it'll be a core sort of development environment, essentially an integration environment, but they still are at their core is applications. And I think S/4HANA is still going to be at the heart of that, and that's why they want to have all the sort of the innovations, the business AI stuff that's coming in will be an integral part of S/4HANA and everything that spins out from S/4HANA, right? Whether it's like the the supply chain applications, whether it's manufacturing, obviously core finance, project management stuff. It's all sort of still part of that whole core of what we would once call an ERP system, but I don't even know if ERP is really the right terminology anymore, right? But and then we're not even getting into it. I mean, we've spent all this time and we haven't even talked about sort of their cloud properties, the Ariba and SuccessFactors and Concur and Fieldglass, all that other stuff.
There was some procurement, some fewer, I think, announcements, but often again the Joule showing up as adding some capabilities and the way those tools talk to each other. Regarding AI, it's a much newer thing, really. I'm talking about the newer age AI, obviously not the stuff that everyone was disappointed with 20, 30 years ago.
Sure.
So it's a newer thing and maybe hard to assess. So what do you think these Sapphire announcements, where do they place, it's a big question, I know, but where do they place SAP in the ERP AI wars?
They're all coming out with stuff, right? I think they're right there. I don't see any of the ERP vendors coming out with stuff that's quote unquote better than what they're doing. I don't see that they're, have more functionality. All these vendors have these things. They're all essentially doing the same things. That you said they're sort of starting into things like maybe you call it glorified search or just condensing a lot of. I think those are the sort of the easy low-hanging fruit that'll be like the first applications for this. But then I'm sure we'll see much more sort of sophisticated applications coming in. And, the question is, how long is it going to take for companies to adopt this? Because it's complex and there's a lot of data. There's a lot of questions that people have about AI. But everyone is sort of investigating it, right? Everybody is. Everybody's sort of playing around with it. Everybody kind of, I think has it sort of somewhere on their on their radar.
Customers do. So
customers, of course, they do.
Yeah. So it's not just SAP and other ERP vendors trying to foist it on people.
No, absolutely not.
So obviously, it's all the rage.
Yeah, I mean, it starts like when ChatGPT is sort of first coming out, and people were just using it in their companies, playing around with it. That's when I think the vendors were all like, "Well, wait a minute, we've got to start looking at this and developing our own sort of versions of what this can do.
I guess maybe this is a good spot to end this. So far, Gen AI has not replaced us as podcasters. That could be next year's version.
No. Well, you have to put it through some filter to make sure my voice is real and it's not being generated from some.
Right, yes. So anyway, good as always, Jim, to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks. It was a good. I think it was a really interesting conference this year.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, one of the more interesting ones.